All right, so welcome back to our final session here on FoodX for the day. And of course, we're going to dive into some very interesting topics as we have throughout the day. And one is, I think, is really kind of diving into where food science is moving. And one of the areas that food science is really kind of exploding is around all of these farms. And this is everything from vertical farming, micro farms, aquaponics. We've seen so many different companies and innovations that have started to occur. And joining me on this session is, of course, Alexander Olesen, who is the CEO and co-founder of Babylon Micro Farms. Great to have you on the session today, Alexander.
Thank you, Paul. Excited to be here.
Yeah, let's get into a little bit about Babylon and what your core mission is. Tell us what you guys do in the micro farm field.
Sure. So we started out about 5 years ago, originally exploring the potential for hydroponics in refugee camps to provide like a low-cost, accessible food source. And through that, we really introduced to sort of the potential for this at a small scale, thinking about what would it take to feed a person, to support a family, and so forth, which gave us the idea for Babylon. And really what we saw is it's technically possible to build farms of that size that are designed for much more kind of tailored applications, but it was a big technology leap from where things were then. So what we do today is we have a patented platform that allows us to remotely manage farms through the cloud. And what that does is it removes the expertise requirements and allows us to provide a very high touch level of service so that people without any prior farming experience can start using vertical farming and growing their own fresh produce.
I like the fact that you're kind of circumventing what could be one of the bigger challenges, which is, kind of just that education and understanding of how to grow produce or any kind of crop for that matter. You have many people who have never done anything in farming, so understanding everything from seasonality to the kind of minerals and just the feed system in general that plants and crops need. Let's get into a little bit about that, because I want to dive into kind of the technology. You guys are using a cloud-based system, a mobile app. We're going to dive into all of those things, so I really want to break them down. But I'm kind of curious, what kind of functionality does the system provide to the farm itself that makes it easier for me as a grower to actually yield something?
Yeah, so I guess to take a step back, like what we saw when we were looking at why couldn't you, Paul, or someone else start farming, vertical farming? You could, but you'd have to learn how to do all of the components. You have to source all the different technologies that it would take to grow crops. And so we built an integrated solution that allows us to automate the farms in the same way like a commercial greenhouse or one of the larger operators would. But then we've combined that with the back-end infrastructure that allows us to both run the farm through the cloud and then aggregate all of the data from the fleet of farms. So we're able to learn how to do things better. And then we also have a sort of Stitch Fix style subscription service whereby all of the farms are automatically sent supplies that are tailored to them. And that is a very efficient system that really removes all the guesswork. So basically by improving all of those different elements and building a complete system, the kind of the whole is much greater than the individual components, and it really reimagines the user experience and the growing experience for aspiring vertical farmers.
Yeah. So that kind of takes the guesswork out of it, definitely. Obviously, now you've got, a technology or an IoT type device that is connected to the cloud. You're controlling the way that everything from water control all the way down to mineral deposits, all that kind of thing?
Yes. So the plants themselves need same conditions outside, right? So they need water, sunlight, or artificial light. And then we need to control the environment and both the solution that the plants are grown. And the thing that makes it so tricky is that for every different plant variety, it needs its own tailored recipe. And that recipe actually changes as the plant grows and matures. And so for us, it was about using sensors and the ability to actuate on all of those individual variables to create dynamic growth recipes that can be honed in to produce the best tasting and the most nutritionally dense produce available.
Yeah, I like the fact that it being cloud-based, because it's, if you look at where technology updates are occurring and, all sorts of tech, all the way down from EV, we cover a lot of that on our shows. And I think when you have cloud-based technology that's constantly being updated and refined or improved for better yields, because you're probably learning from other, results within your network, are you actively updating that software that essentially gives every farm kind of a new lease on yield capacity?
Yes, so there are multiple components to our business, and a lot of it is behind the scenes, right? So we have a lab here in Richmond where we're doing testing. So we have basically baseline growth recipes for our farms that we know that the plant will grow well to a consistent flavor or yield profile. And then we do have the ability to close the feedback loop. So we actually do computer vision within the farms using infrared cameras to capture NDVI images, and that allows us to actually tell the health of the plants and how they're reacting to a lot of the input variables. And that's a really exciting piece of technology that we think has applications across the industry. But in practical terms, it allows us to make our recipes better and the plants taste better.
I love that. Okay, so let's get into one of the bigger elements, and that is when you look at the world's population, plant and or potentially faux products or engineered foods are going to be pretty much the solution as we go into the next few decades in terms of just feeding the population. Plant-based is, and you see proponents across the industry, whether it's science that's talking about the consumption of materials, raw materials, meaning mostly water, which is a very, very valuable resource, especially in third world countries. How would this product be able to efficiently go into, say, a third world country or a country that is emerging, that needs the ability to either, one, increase capacity and yields? How would you be able to, or would you be able to do anything to help some of those countries out?
Well, I think that's the dream for us, and it's also the necessity for the whole industry to get there, right? It's for there are various inflection points happening at the moment, from the falling cost of sensors through to increased inefficiencies of LED lights that are making this business model work in developed countries and will over time make it possible in developing countries. I think for us, we're really creating a new category within this market, which is sort of micro farming, right? So that is anything from thousands of square feet down to an individual module that could go into a restaurant or a community organization. And so that is a much more accessible alternative to what's being done today, because typically what is required is really massive scale. So that inherently is quite capital intensive. And so for us, by using this data collection, by using the service that we're able to provide, we're really opening up the market for what's possible. And the software and the infrastructure we're building is transferable to different grow systems. And that means that we can do a wide range of crop varieties over time. And it also means we can tailor what's growing in them to suit specific organizations and communities, which I think is really exciting. And we're really building a lot of that infrastructure so that over time it can grow the market for what is possible with vertical farming and ultimately increase accessibility.
In looking at some of the equipment and just kind of the systems that you guys have built, it looks like you've got some scale capacity there with, very small micro farms to what seems to be a little bit more industrial grade micro farms without going to like a 40-foot container, scenario. Because those present problems across the industry. We've talked to Farm in a Box and all kinds of companies that are building those kinds of systems. And there's a place for those, I definitely agree. But you're right, being able to get into the masses, whether it's the restaurant ecosystem, light industrial or logistics systems that wanted to do, like Farm in a Box delivery. We've got one of those here in Miami that we're going to explore soon. Do you see the equipment being I guess I should say, what is the unit economics of how that equipment can be deployed? Is this going to be a lease? Is it something that you sell to the individual? How does all that come about?
Yeah, I think so. So there's what we do now, and then there's what we think is happening within the industry. So right now we have really beautiful front of house looking product that is leased or purchased. And it's still relatively expensive. We're producing in low volume, and that's just the nature of these things as they get started. But as a comparable, a double door refrigerator of the same dimensions and similar material components costs under $1,000 at mass scale. And if we're able to get to that price point, we would be undercutting wholesale produce prices. So that's the potential
Okay.
for this kind of modular alternative. And we draw the comparison to solar and things like that, like distributed and rooftop solar at the beginning, didn't really undercut wholesale electricity at all, right? It's a bit of a novelty, but over time, that production scales up, you get more efficient, and then you really can be a viable alternative. And that's really what we're racing to create. And I think, broadly speaking, the components that go into these farms are relatively cheap. It's metal, it's LED lights, it's plastic, it's basic stuff. So we don't think there's a winner takes all product in this space. We think there will be different products emerging for specific markets and for specific crop types. And so we're really designing modularity into our control systems and the software so that we'll be able to support all of those different grow systems with this high level of automation and service, which again just kind of removes a lot of the barriers to entry for people getting started.
Okay, so let's jump into, all right, so square footage wise, if I wanted to put let's just stay in the restaurant industry for a moment, because we're seeing more and more restaurant operators who are trying to look and do something that's a little bit more unique, especially around the plant-based side of things. If I wanted to say deal with a restaurant that is doing 300 to 400 covers a day, so that's dinners, plates, of food. Let's say 50% of those are going to be more plant forward. So I need a supply system that's either, obviously going to have that, or at least supplemental. How many of these kinds of units would I need? What kind of size, capacity, and yield would I get?
Yeah, so for us, we're looking at around 82-ounce servings of salad per week per unit. So that's like a relatively decent bowl of salad as a base ingredient. What we found is for fine herbs, microgreens, things like that, we can be much more impactful and make someone completely self-sufficient. But of course, the way the units are designed, you can link them together to create farms of different sizes. So yeah, in a lot of cases, it's a complement. But if you go to the more fine herbs and harder to source varieties, you could actually be self-sufficient in those.
So if I'm looking at artisanal, if you go to the fine dining category, it may not necessarily work for a sweet green who's pumping out, just ridiculous volumes of salad, and they need, 6 varieties of different kinds of lettuce produce. So that may not necessarily, at least not today, unless you had a back of house that's growing at just a ridiculous yield capacity. But if I was going into fine herbs, more of those artisanal types of additions that either one, they're used for plate garnish or adding into a particular recipe, you're saying that in that kind of scenario, one or two of these units would essentially become self-sustaining for the operator?
Yeah, we found it can really make a big impact with just 1 or 2 units. We're looking at like between 6 and 8 pounds of basil per week from a single unit.
Okay, all right.
So it's pretty impactful. And again, for those kind of fine dining culinary herbs, the volumes are fairly low. So in a lot of cases, that's actually more than enough.
Yeah.
And for that back of house, we do some back of house options. So it is something that people can do, right? If they have a production farm in the back and then front of house stuff as well, it works.
Right. Okay, so the yield capacity could be there for the right kind of product, at least at this stage. It's rolling over. Obviously, aquaponics is a very fast yield type of component. Do you see, when you look at the yield capacities, are there technologies or things that you guys are working on in terms of advancing the tech or the equipment in the future, anytime soon, that would really ramp up yield production to make a significant difference in how we'd be able to use these kind of microfarms?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is really what all of this data collection enables. And for us, we have a very sophisticated technology stack really in line with any of the large commercial growers, and we've miniaturized that for our own applications. And the reason we're doing that is so that we can leverage the data to get better at what we do and improve yields, improve flavor. And we're already seeing that in the lab, consecutive trials where we're able to incrementally increase the yield. And I think, again, with all this data collection, it's this dynamic recipe, right? That is the ability to kind of tweak the conditions and specific variables within the farm to suit a specific crop variety is really where the industry's heading. Like we try to avoid using kind of like AI, machine learning, but I think that is where it goes. And as we get more data, we can really hone in onto those variables and produce exciting results for both nutritionally and flavor-wise.
Yeah, for sure. Alexander, let's talk about, if I were to get to a wholesale level, we have a company down here that is kind of going into these micro farms. They started doing, produce in a box, basically for weekly delivery for home. So this is more of a retail application. If I were a business, whether I'm a restaurant business or somebody that's maybe an entrepreneur that's looking to get into kind of this approach for my community, and I wanted to, lease a warehouse and drop in, 25 of these units for a variety of different, plant bases. My growth capacity for that, if I were to go that direction versus, say, going the direction of, say, a 40-foot container, a container farm that's outputting, I've seen numbers between 2,000 and 3,000 pounds of produce per annual, I think, has been kind of the comparison. Is this something that could stay or keep pace with something like that, since they are a bit more mobile and probably could get into smaller places? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there are a lot of factors that go into the decision of how to build a farm and what provider to use. I think a lot of it's like retail space, like what is the price of land? Is there an abandoned parking lot where you could put a 40-foot container? I think those are the main conditions. I think generally speaking, hydroponics and vertical farming, the productive capacities are broadly similar, and then it depends on like how many layers you have, and then of course once you get really into the weeds, you can then start dialing up those yields for your specific system. But generally speaking, a lot of the characteristics of a vertical farm remain the same. You can have a zip grow horizontal tower, or you can have vertical, but otherwise it's the same underlying technology.
Yeah. Well, my point is to, if you're an entrepreneur or you're, maybe you're a restaurant operator that you're trying to figure out how to do something with, space that used to be a dining room because now you have less dining. So you've got all this space and you say, all right, well, let's drop in some micro farms, start providing, produce to not only our restaurant, but maybe to our customers. And we've seen that happen, especially in the restaurant space, to where we've seen, those kind of innovations. I guess the question is economically, which route is maybe the right one to take? Is it going with a little bit more easy to access, mini micro farms, much like what you guys are producing? We shouldn't say mini, but, more manageable versus trying to move a 40-foot container around. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's apples to oranges, really. I think what we're doing is creating a very different experience to grow the market. For like someone who wants to invest in building their own vertical farm or buying a 40-foot container is probably not a customer for us. We're creating something where it's like, if you want it as a complement to your business and you don't want to learn how to become a farmer, then you would use us, because we've created a much more streamlined experience for people just like that.
Yeah, very cool. Let's get into your app and kind of this whole idea of networked and cloud computing and where this is going in the future. Could this technology that you guys are developing be utilized for, traditional farming? Because that's, this has been a scenario that many farmers are facing around the world, is just being able to get networked and cloud computing and data to help them increase their yield capacities. Is there a potential for you guys to maybe license this out into, bigger opportunities?
I think that for cloud computing broadly, yes, massive opportunity for us. Probably not. We're really creating a very specialized system to suit modular vertical farming, and I think that is an emerging category within indoor farming, which over time will be able to grow a much broader range of things, from berries and such. We're basically developing the software infrastructure for that to work with different vertical farming hardware, which ultimately is going to be plenty big enough of a market for us, and something we're focused on. I think there are other people who will be better suited to doing outdoor farming tech.
Yeah. Do you find when you guys are looking at the markets of where this is going to go, do you feel like this is going to be more of a retail? Is this a business, aspect where it might fall into a restaurant or a food supply or a grocery store or somewhere like that? Where do you see the markets for you guys in terms of growth?
Yeah, well, I'd say all of the above to some extent for the industry, right? It's anywhere that eats fresh food. I think what we're seeing for us specifically is a lot of opportunities both at the business and community level. So our focus right now is what we call institutional food service. So anywhere that has like a food service operation, not a restaurant, but more at the kind of business, healthcare, education level. We're having a lot of success there, and it's a great segment to be in. But over time, we see what we're doing as an amenity for new buildings. We see it as an amenity for communities, and we also see a lot of potential in dark kitchens and retail environment as well.
Yeah, the dark kitchen, I think, is definitely going to be a big market because, they're going to have the space in most cases if they're in usually flex facility, which usually gives you a little bit more opportunity there. Let's talk a little bit about the trends, and that is when you look at consumer trends on plant-based consumption up dramatically over the past 18, 24 months. We've seen continuous growth in this sector, especially in the retail restaurant group, but also in the specialty foods category. A lot of plant-based derivatives that are kind of being developed. With that being the case, and this is kind of an argument that I have occasionally with different kinds of scientists around the topic of plant-based replacement of animal proteins. If you look at just the pure volume of what the human species consumes, and if we had to shift most of that or a large portion of that over to plant-based, if that were the case, do you guys feel, when you look at those kinds of trends, I mean, it seems like you'd almost need one of these in every household to be able to keep up with the demand?
Well, that would suit us just fine. I think what we're going to see is we're going to see indoor farming become the next renewable infrastructure piece, right? So you're seeing the transformation with wind and electricity. It's going to be the same for indoor farming, and then similarly with plant-based proteins and such. These are emerging categories that are going to reshape the food supply chain globally. And I think for modular vertical farming, like what we do through to the large scale industrial vertical farming, they're all part of this disruption, right? And they have their own merits and own shortcomings. And I hope in the next 10 to 20 years, we're going to see it become a requirement for new buildings and communities as they're developed as this kind of next generation sustainable food infrastructure.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, especially as I guess with community living and whether or not we see, the continuation of urbanized centers, which was really on a track, for several years. And now we've seen kind of a little bit of a pullback here with what's happened in the past, year and a half. And whether that is going to start to move, to some of these more suburbanite, scenarios, which could open up some opportunities there as well. So that's going to be fun to watch. Is there any particular trend that you guys are watching very closely so that you can align your product or what you guys are doing with what you're doing there? Is there any particular trend that you're watching really closely that you think is moving?
I think there's sort of this whole hyper-local food movement. It's fantastic to see, both for its improvement in regenerative agriculture, but I think what we're doing really ties into that and giving this whole kind of teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime, right? We teach them how to farm. It's getting there, and we have the tools that allow businesses and their communities to start growing, and we're seeing that kind of mentality is really kind of in line with how things are changing, and ultimately something that we want to see more of. I think it's really just getting started, and we're going to see it really become a mainstay piece of culture moving forward, and indoor farming is part of that.
Absolutely. And of course, with all of this talk about space travel, we're going to need farms out there.
We are, and I hope that we somehow play a part in that at some point in the future.
Well, there you go. You and Elon need to get together. You put up a plan for Mars, and everybody's happy. I love it.
That would be fun.
Alexander, it's been great having you on. Thank you so much for stopping in on today's session. It's been a joy.
Pleasure, Paul. Thanks for having me.
You bet. All right, so you guys stay tuned right here as we wrap up FoodX. And really kind of the idea behind FoodX is really to explore innovations in food and technology and how it's moving our planet to the next level. If you have a great idea of someone you want on one of the FoodX sessions, because we're having more of these throughout the year, just shoot us basically an email, and you can catch us at producer@foodabletv.com, or you can always hit me up on Twitter. We'll catch you next time right here on FoodX.